My boss tried to make me quit, so I took his job. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to write one of these long, workplace revenge type stories. But here we are. If you've ever had a boss who seemed like they were playing some secret game of chess where you were the pawn they wanted off the board, then you'll probably understand exactly what I went through. Let me start by saying I've always been the type of employee who keeps my head down, does my work, and lets results speak louder than politics. I'm not the loudest person in the room, but I know my craft, I deliver on deadlines. And I've built a reputation over the years as someone reliable. That reputation, it turns out, was exactly what painted a target on my back. I worked, at a mid-sized company in a competitive industry. We weren't some flashy Silicon Valley startup with beanbags and kombucha on tap, but we weren't a boring old cubicle farm either. Think somewhere in between. Glass offices, decent perks, enough structure to feel corporate, but enough chaos to feel like every project was life or death. When I first joined, I was just happy to have landed a stable position. I was one of those people who thought if I worked hard enough, the system would reward me. And for a while, it seemed like that might actually be true. Then I met Mr. Carter. Mr. Carter was my direct manager, and on paper, he looked like the golden boy of the company. He had the resume stacked with achievements, the charm to make senior executives laugh in boardrooms, and the confidence of someone who thought they were untouchable. At first, I actually admired him. He seemed sharp, decisive, and willing to push the team toward ambitious goals. I thought, okay, this guy's tough, but he'll make me better. That illusion didn't last long. See, there's a difference between being tough and being manipulative. There's a difference between challenging your employees and deliberately setting them up to fail. And Mr. Carter, I learned pretty quickly, lived for the latter. It started small. A snide comment here, a dismissive look there. Once I stayed late working on a report he had asked for, only for him to forget that he'd asked me and scold me for wasting company resources on unnecessary busy work. Another time, I presented an idea during a team meeting. He brushed it off with a condescending, "That's not really aligned with our direction." 2 weeks later, he pitched the exact same idea to upper management, word for word, as if it were his own brainchild. And guess who got praised for being innovative? That was my first real taste of his style. Take credit for the wins, deflect blame for the losses, and make sure everyone around him looked a little less competent than him. At first, I brushed it off as me overthinking. Maybe that's just how corporate life worked. Maybe I was being too sensitive, but then the pattern became too obvious to ignore. One of his favorite tactics was assigning me impossible deadlines. Can you pull together a full market analysis by tomorrow morning? He'd say at 5:30 p.m., right as I was shutting down for the day. Or, we need this 40-page client deck ready for Monday. Oh, and make sure the design team has everything too. This was usually said on Friday afternoon. Now, I'm no stranger to hard work, and I'm not afraid of late nights when it's necessary. But this wasn't necessity. This was intentional sabotage dressed up as urgency. And here's the kicker. Whenever I actually did pull it off, he'd take the credit in meetings. "Yeah, I pushed the team hard on this one," he'd say, patting himself on the back while presenting my work as though he'd created it from scratch. And when I couldn't hit his impossible deadlines, he'd throw me under the bus. "I'm not sure OP has the time management skills for this level of responsibility," he once said in front of a director. That one stung. But the worst part wasn't the workload. It was the way he used public humiliation as his weapon of choice. Team meetings were like his personal stage. If I made a minor mistake, a typo in a slide, a missed detail in a spreadsheet, he'd pounce on it and tear me down in front of everyone. "Seriously, OP? This is basic stuff," he'd sneer, shaking his head dramatically. "We can't afford sloppy work like this." The room would go silent. People would look down at their laptops, suddenly fascinated by their keyboards, praying not to be next. I could feel my face burning, my stomach knotting up, but I'd just nod and take notes. What else could I do? Arguing back would only make me look defensive. And the cruel irony, half the time, those mistakes were things he had told me to do. Here's where things get interesting though. Despite everything, I kept grinding. I delivered on the big projects. I built relationships with clients who loved working with me. I found ways to meet deadlines even when they were insane, and upper management started to notice. I'd be in a meeting and one of the VPs would say, "Great work on that presentation, OP. The client feedback was excellent." Or, "I really like the way OP has been handling the new accounts." Those moments were like oxygen after being underwater too long. They reminded me I wasn't crazy, I actually was doing good work. And they also showed me exactly why Mr. Carter hated me so much. Because in his eyes, I wasn't just an employee, I was a threat. The tension built slowly, like a pot of water simmering. Every week there was some new jab, some new impossible task, some new humiliation. And every week I clawed my way through it. But then came the moment that flipped everything. It was after a long meeting where I'd presented a strategy update that the VP had asked for. The VP had complimented me directly. Me, not Mr. Carter, and I could see his jaw tighten across the table. Later that afternoon, he called me into his office. He leaned back in his leather chair, hands folded, that smug smirk plastered on his face. "OP," he said in that fake friendly tone he used when he was about to say something cruel. "You should start thinking if this company is the right fit for you." I blinked. Excuse me? You're talented, sure, but I'm not sure you're aligned with our culture here. You might be happier somewhere else. It was phrased like advice, but the message was clear. Get out. And in that moment, I realized he wasn't just tough. He wasn't just demanding. He wanted me gone. That was the day I knew this wasn't just a job anymore. This was a battle. After that little pep talk in his office where he basically told me to quit, I thought maybe things would cool down. Maybe he'd gotten his frustration out and we could just exist in some tense Cold War-like silence. Yeah, I was dead wrong. Mr. Carter didn't just want me gone, he wanted to crush me on the way out. The first wave came in the form of pure, unrelenting workload. Before, he'd been tough. Now, he was merciless. Every day, new urgent tasks landed in my inbox. Reports, analyses, client decks, budget forecasts, side projects he suddenly deemed critical, all with impossible deadlines. Need this EOD. Let's get this by tomorrow morning. Shouldn't take you more than a few hours, right? And of course, each task wasn't just busy work. It was stuff that required serious time, research, and coordination with other teams. I'd come in at 8 a.m. already behind, and I wouldn't leave until 10 or 11 p.m. And even then, I'd drag myself home only to open my laptop again, staring at spreadsheets until my eyes blurred. Weekends stopped existing. My social life evaporated. I was a ghost in my own apartment. But here's the kicker. No matter how much I did, it was never enough. The second wave, micromanagement. You know the type of boss who says, I trust you to handle this, but then proceeds to hover over every keystroke you make? Yeah, that was him. He'd demand updates every hour. He'd call me into his office to review work I'd already completed, only to nitpick insignificant details. He once spent 45 minutes berating me because the font size in one client email wasn't consistent with brand tone. It wasn't feedback, it wasn't guidance, it was control. Pure, suffocating control. I started to feel like a prisoner in my own job. I couldn't breathe without wondering if I'd done something wrong. And when I did manage to finish something without his interference, he'd swoop in at the last second and change everything, then present it as his own work. The third wave hit harder than I expected. I started noticing little whispers, small things at first. A coworker asking if I was feeling overwhelmed. Someone else mentioning they'd heard I was struggling to keep up. It didn't take long to figure out where it was coming from. Mr. Carter was spreading rumors, quietly planting seeds of doubt in people's minds. He's a nice guy, but I'm not sure he can handle the pressure. Talented, but maybe not cut out for leadership. Sometimes I worry about his commitment. Those little comments snowballed. Suddenly, people I'd worked alongside for years looked at me differently. Like I was fragile. Like I was slipping. It was gaslighting at a corporate level, and the worst part, I almost believed it. I'm not going to lie, it broke me. I'd sit at my desk late at night, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, staring at another endless spreadsheet, and feel this heavy pit in my stomach. I started dreading Mondays so much that Sunday afternoons felt like funerals. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, convinced I'd missed some deadline. At my lowest point, I actually drafted a resignation email. It sat in my drafts folder for 3 days. Maybe he's right, I thought. Maybe this job just isn't for me. Maybe I should just quit before I completely fall apart. But then something happened. Not everyone bought into his narrative. One of my coworkers, let's call her Emily, pulled me aside one day after a particularly brutal meeting where he'd torn me apart over a minor formatting error. Hey, she said gently, don't let him get in your head. We all see what he's doing. You're not the problem. He is. Another colleague, Raj, started quietly slipping me warnings. Heads up, he's going to dump the quarterly report on you last minute. Just thought you should know. And then there was Linda, a manager from another department. She'd been at the company forever, had seen bosses come and go, and had zero patience for office politics. Over lunch one day, she looked me straight in the eye and said, don't quit. Document everything. Trust me. That sentence stuck in my brain like glue. Don't quit. Document everything. So that's what I did. I started keeping a private folder, screenshots of emails, notes from conversations, copies of reports with timestamps, even Slack messages where he contradicted himself. Every time he assigned me something impossible, I logged it. Every time he berated me in front of the team, I wrote down the exact words. Every time he claimed credit for my work, I saved the files that proved otherwise. It became my secret weapon, a shield, in case I ever needed to defend myself. And slowly, collecting that evidence gave me back a little bit of power. The real turning point came a few weeks later. I was staying late, as usual, when I stumbled across something strange in one of our shared project folders. It was an old client report, buried under layers of revisions. The numbers didn't add up. At first, I thought I was just tired. But after double-checking, I realized this was a huge mistake, a financial miscalculation that had cost the client thousands. And here's the kicker. The blame had already been pinned on a junior staff member who'd messed up the data entry. I remembered that poor kid. He'd been quietly pushed out a few months earlier, supposedly for performance issues. But now, looking at the file history, it was clear as day. Mr. Carter had made the mistake himself. He'd covered it up, and he'd ruined someone else's career to do it. For a brief, burning moment, I wanted to blow it up. Send the file to HR, drop it in the VP's inbox, watch his whole facade collapse overnight. But then I stopped myself. No, not yet. Exposing him now would be satisfying, sure, but it wouldn't be enough. He was too good at spinning narratives, too slippery. If I fired too early, he'd twist it around, make me look like the vindictive employee out for revenge. I needed more. I needed patience. I needed to let him dig his own grave while I quietly collected the shovels. That night, sitting alone in the office, staring at the glowing numbers on my screen, something inside me shifted. I closed the resignation draft in my inbox, deleted it, emptied the trash folder. If he wanted me gone, he'd have to work a hell of a lot harder. I wasn't quitting. I wasn't breaking. If Mr. Carter wanted a war, then fine, I'd give him one. Only I wasn't going to fight it his way. I was going to fight it smart. And for the first time in months, I walked out of that office with a smile on my face. After the moment I decided I wasn't going to quit, something inside me changed. Before, I was just surviving, trying to keep my head above water, hoping I wouldn't drown under the weight of Mr. Carter's manipulations. But surviving was no longer enough. I realized that if I wanted to come out of this battle alive and on top, I had to start playing strategically. I needed a plan. For years, I'd approach work with a mindset of execution. Do your tasks, deliver results, hope people notice. That mindset got me recognition early on, but against someone like Mr. Carter, it wasn't enough. He thrived on control, intimidation, and chaos. So I realized the key wasn't just being competent, it was being visible in the right ways, building influence quietly and setting traps with precision. I needed to move from reaction to orchestration. The first step was alliances. I started quietly talking to people in other departments, not gossiping, not complaining, just building connections. I reached out to the finance team to understand how budgets were really tracked. I connected with the marketing group to volunteer on cross-departmental campaigns. I casually asked questions to operations about upcoming projects, showing interest, offering help, without ever mentioning my boss or his tactics. The key here was subtlety. I wasn't telling anyone, my boss is a nightmare. I was just being myself, competent and dependable, letting people see the contrast between me and Mr. Carter organically. Slowly, people started confiding in me. A few mentioned feeling frustrated with him. Others admitted they'd noticed his pattern of taking credit for work or pushing people to burnout. Nothing formal, just quiet murmurs, enough to validate that I wasn't imagining things. Next, I began volunteering for projects that would put me in front of senior management, strategically avoiding Mr. Carter's direct control whenever possible. I asked to lead client presentations, contributed to strategic initiatives, and found ways to provide solutions that visibly impacted the company's performance. The trick was subtlety. I never undermined him outright. I framed my actions as helping the team or taking initiative, never making it about him. But the result was inevitable. Senior leadership started noticing me more. Emails from VPs praising work, colleagues saying, "Hey, you really nailed that client deck." It all added up. And as expected, Mr. Carter noticed. I could feel it almost immediately. He started micromanaging even more intensely, popping into meetings uninvited, hovering over my work, and making pointed comments in passing. "You're really spending a lot of time on that project, aren't you?" he asked one day, smirking as if implying I was wasting time. I smiled, nodded, and kept working. I had patience now. I knew he'd eventually overreach. He also started sending subtle warnings to other team members. Don't get too close to OP's ideas. They can be tricky. It was classic gaslighting, classic control, and classic Mr. Carter. But by this point, I had allies. People weren't just believing him automatically anymore. Then came the real test. The VP handed me a major client project, high stakes, high visibility with the company's reputation riding on it. Normally, Mr. Carter would have been in control. Normally, I would have been forced to run everything through him. But thanks to the relationships I'd built, I could maneuver around him for the first time. I planned every step meticulously. Backup documents, timelines, contingency plans for every potential problem he might throw my way. I was preparing not just to complete the project, but to do so flawlessly in a way that even he couldn't sabotage. And of course, he tried. He inserted last-minute requirements that would have delayed the client delivery, deliberately tried to confuse the team with conflicting instructions, and even hinted to the client that our department might be behind schedule. But I had anticipated all of it. I had double-checked every email, every attachment, every timeline. The team followed my lead, and we delivered everything perfectly, ahead of schedule. The VP called me personally. "I don't know how you did this, but excellent work, OP. You really saved this client." While executing this project, I noticed patterns in Mr. Carter's behavior that went beyond petty sabotage. I started paying attention to things others hadn't noticed. Budget manipulation. He was reporting inflated expenses, covering small embezzlements with miscellaneous costs, misreporting performance metrics. He made the department look better on paper when it suited him and buried failures in documents no one checked closely. Lying about project delays. Deadlines missed, never his fault. Always someone else, always an unexpected circumstance. Every piece of information was like fuel for the fire. I started collecting it quietly, storing it in a secure folder on my personal drive. Screenshots, emails, meeting notes, everything. At the same time, I began sharing my ideas directly with senior executives during meetings. Not aggressively, not to steal the spotlight, but strategically, just enough to demonstrate competence and initiative without appearing to undermine Mr. Carter. It was subtle, like nudging a chess piece into place while your opponent is distracted. Slowly, the executives started seeing me as someone reliable, someone with vision, someone who could handle responsibility without drama. Meanwhile, Mr. Carter's paranoia continued to grow. He'd ask me off-the-record questions, try to corner me in the hallway, but I stayed calm, never gave him the satisfaction of a reaction. He was losing control, but he didn't realize it yet. By the end of the chapter, I realized I had enough to take things to the next level. I started putting together a detailed report, a dossier of Mr. Carter's mismanagement. Every small mistake, every lie, every unethical maneuver, documented in chronological order. It was methodical, organized, and damning, the kind of document that could not be ignored. I didn't act on it yet. Patience, I reminded myself. Timing would be everything. Expose him too early and he could spin it. Wait too long and I risked losing the momentum I'd built. Sitting in my apartment that night, reviewing the dossier, I felt a strange mix of adrenaline and calm. For the first time, I felt in control. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was no longer just surviving. I was orchestrating. Mr. Carter wanted war? Fine. I was ready to fight, but on my terms. And so I made a promise to myself. Play smart, gather evidence, win without giving him a chance to see it coming. I knew one thing for sure. The next chapter of this story wasn't going to be about him controlling me anymore. It was going to be about me taking the board, one strategic move at a time. I knew the moment was coming. I just didn't know when. After weeks of careful planning, building alliances, collecting evidence, and navigating Mr. Carter's petty sabotage, I could feel the tension thickening in the office like a storm about to break. And then it happened. It started like any other Monday, but the air felt heavier, charged. I was reviewing the quarterly client report, cross-referencing numbers with the finance team, the same meticulous checks I'd been doing for months when my phone buzzed. It was a calendar notification. Meeting with Mr. Carter urgent. I already had a bad feeling in my gut. When I walked into his office, he was leaning back in his chair, smirking as usual, the picture of false confidence. OP, he said smoothly, we need to talk about the Preston deal. I nodded. Sure, what about it? He leaned forward suddenly, eyes narrowing. It failed. Completely. And, well, you were handling the client correspondence and deliverables. Can you explain why this was mishandled? I froze for a split second. Not because I didn't know what to say, I knew exactly what happened, but because I had to control myself. Calm, methodical, unemotional. That was my strength now. Actually, I said slowly, pulling up my laptop, let me show you the timeline of communications, approvals, and updates. He blinked. He wasn't used to people confronting him so calmly. I went through every step. Emails confirming timelines, Slack messages, clarifying responsibilities, project deliverables, and deadlines. Everything he had tried to spin as my mistake had clear documentation showing the real sequence of events. By the time I finished, the smug expression had vanished, replaced by that slight twitch of panic that I learned to recognize. I could feel his pulse racing. He realized I had him cornered, but he wasn't done yet. Well, the client is upset, he said, trying to regain control. We need to protect the department. We can't have this kind of failure reflected in upper management. I nodded. Absolutely, which is why I've also compiled a detailed report on the project, including all approvals and the steps taken by every team member. Would you like me to send it to HR and the VP? He froze. I could see him calculating his options. That's when I realized this wasn't just a client issue anymore. It was a trap. It didn't take long for the VP and HR to get involved. Within 24 hours, I was called into a private meeting with the VP, HR, and the legal department. Mr. Carter, of course, was present, trying to project calm authority, but you could tell he knew something was about to unravel. I presented my case. Calm, precise, evidence-based. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make emotional appeals. I let the documentation speak for itself. Screenshots of emails, timelines of project steps, copies of approvals, and even the internal miscommunications. He had tried to cover up every piece meticulously organized. The room was silent for a few moments after I finished. HR and legal were scanning the documents, murmuring to each other. The VP leaned back, eyes narrowing at Mr. Carter. This is thorough, the VP said slowly. Very thorough. Mr. Carter shifted in his seat, looking increasingly uncomfortable. His usual confidence was cracking. Then something unexpected happened. My colleagues started talking. Not me bringing them in, not me coaching them, just quietly, naturally, in support of the facts I had presented. One by one, people who had suffered under his manipulation stepped forward. The junior staff he had blamed for mistakes, the team members whose contributions he had taken credit for, even a few from other departments who had witnessed his sabotage, they spoke. I remember that incident, one colleague said, where he assigned me a task and then told the client it wasn't delivered on time. I had all the emails, but he claimed it was my fault. Another added, he pressured me to alter a report for the quarterly review. I didn't, and he tried to make me look incompetent. It was like a dam breaking, one voice, then another, all corroborating the story I had quietly documented for months. I watched as his face went from disbelief to panic to outright anger, and finally a pale sort of desperation. He tried to interrupt, tried to defend himself, tried to redirect blame, but it was useless. Every lie he told was contradicted by evidence. Every accusation he made bounced back on him. HR and legal were taking notes. The VP was asking pointed questions. And the more he fumbled, the clearer it became that this was the end of his reign, at least for now. By the end of the meeting, HR had made a decision. Mr. Carter was to be suspended immediately pending investigation. The words hit me in a surreal way. Suspended. Not fired yet, but removed from power, from control, from the ability to hurt anyone else while the investigation proceeded. It felt like stepping out of a nightmare I'd been trapped in for months. I remember sitting there for a moment after the meeting, heart pounding, trying to process it. It was almost too much to believe. The man who had dominated, intimidated, and sabotaged me for months was finally off the board, and I had stayed calm enough to make it happen. Walking back to my desk, the office felt different, lighter. People who had been hesitant, anxious, or afraid were now looking at me with relief, gratitude, or quiet respect. No one needed to say it aloud. They had all witnessed the shift. The toxic presence that had haunted us for months was gone, at least temporarily. I checked my emails, and one VP had sent me a short note. Excellent work. Thank you for handling this with the professionalism. It wasn't praise I craved, but it mattered. It was validation, proof that I hadn't been imagining the abuse and that integrity and preparation could actually win against manipulation. And yet, it wasn't over. I wasn't celebrating. Not yet. Part of me wanted to breathe, to feel relief, to finally exhale after months of tension. But another part of me was already thinking ahead. The investigation would take time. Mr. Carter was still out there, technically an employee, technically a potential threat, and the truth was, his removal didn't automatically fix everything he had broken. Relationships, morale, team dynamics, those things needed repair. I also knew that this wasn't the final victory. It was just the first one. The battle lines had been drawn, and I was now fully aware of what it would take to finish it. But for the first time in months, I felt hope. Hope that the nightmare was ending. Hope that competence, patience, and strategy could actually beat manipulation and power games. Hope that I was finally turning the tables. And in that moment, I allowed myself a small, quiet smile. Weeks passed after the suspension, and I'll admit those weeks were some of the most anxious I've ever experienced. Mr. Carter was out of the office, but his shadow lingered. Rumors flew, whispers circulated, and for a while, it felt like the entire company was holding its breath, waiting to see how everything would shake out. I kept my head down, continued managing my projects, and quietly leaned on the allies I'd built across departments. Emily, Raj, and Linda were my lifelines, not just morally, but practically, helping me coordinate workflow, maintain team morale, and keep the department running despite the chaos. Finally, the call came. HR requested a private meeting. My stomach sank a little, memories of all the months of stress flashing through my mind. But this time, I walked in with confidence. I had been prepared for months. I knew the evidence was solid. HR sat me down and, with a formal tone, delivered the verdict. Mr. Carter was officially terminated. Fired. I felt a rush of disbelief and relief. Fired. The man who had spent months trying to push me out, manipulate everyone around him, and undermine my career. Gone. Just like that. It was surreal. Immediately after the announcement, the VP called me into her office. She thanked me personally for handling the department during the investigation and the fallout. Your calm and methodical approach has kept this team afloat. You didn't just survive, you led. I tried not to grin too much. Leading? Me? That was a thought I hadn't even allowed myself until recently. She continued, "We'd like you to serve as interim manager until we decide on the permanent replacement. I know it's a lot, but I can think of no one better." I nodded, almost speechless. "Thank you. I won't let you down." I walked out of that office with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. Not only had I survived, I was being entrusted to rebuild the very environment that had nearly crushed me. The first few weeks were tricky. The department had been in shambles. Morale was low. People were skeptical, tired, and afraid. I made it my mission to change that. I started by being transparent, setting clear expectations, acknowledging the past issues, and encouraging open communication. I made a point to recognize team members' contributions publicly, reversing the culture of fear Mr. Carter had fostered. I implemented small, practical changes, better workflow tracking, weekly check-ins to discuss challenges, and opportunities for people to lead projects based on their strengths. Slowly, the environment began to shift. People started smiling again, meetings became collaborative rather than tense, and productivity improved without the constant undercurrent of fear. I even noticed something small but satisfying. Colleagues who had once avoided me or doubted me now came to me with questions, ideas, and even gratitude. The trust I had quietly built months ago was paying off in real ways. Then, a few months later, the VP called me in again. She looked at me with a smile that mixed seriousness with something almost conspiratorial. "OP, we've made a decision," she said. "You've handled the interim role exceptionally well. We'd like to offer you the position permanently." I felt a rush of disbelief. "You mean the full manager role?" "Yes. Your leadership has been exemplary. You've turned this team around while keeping clients happy. You've earned it." For a moment, I just stared at the office I had once walked past with anxiety and dread, the office that had belonged to Mr. Carter. And now, just like that, it was mine. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who had spent months trying to push me out had, in the end, handed me the keys to his own office without realizing it. Sitting in that new office on my first day as the official manager, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. I thought about the late nights, the stress, the emotional breakdowns. I thought about the moments I had almost quit, the times I questioned myself, the patience it took to wait for the right moment. And I realized the best revenge wasn't confrontation, wasn't exposing him in a fit of anger. It wasn't even winning the promotion, though that was undeniably sweet. The best revenge was patience, preparation, and letting toxic people destroy themselves. Mr. Carter had dug his own grave with lies, manipulation, and arrogance. I just waited, quietly built my case, and ensured the outcome I wanted without compromising my integrity. I also learned a critical lesson about resilience. Sometimes, survival isn't just about enduring, it's about using what feels like suffering as a stepping stone to something better. The department was healthier now, clients were happier, team members were more engaged, and I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I wasn't just an employee anymore. I was a leader, someone who had turned adversity into opportunity. And as for Mr. Carter, I never wished him harm, but I'll admit, seeing his name off the company roster gave me a quiet sense of justice. The man who tried so hard to undermine me, to make me quit, to control everyone around him, he lost, and I won. Sometimes, life has a funny way of rewarding persistence and patience. Sometimes, those who seek to destroy you end up being the ones who pave the way for your success if you're smart enough to wait and prepared enough to act. So here's a takeaway. For anyone reading this who has ever been under a manipulative boss, a toxic environment, or a situation that seems impossible, document everything. Evidence is power. Build alliances quietly. You don't have to go it alone. Be patient. Timing can make all the difference. Stay professional. Losing your cool only gives toxic people ammunition. Believe in yourself. No one can take away your competence, skill, or perseverance. I didn't just survive Mr. Carter. I outlasted him, outsmarted him, and ultimately thrived. And the best part? I didn't have to stoop to his level. I didn't have to play dirty. I just had to be patient, prepared, and smart. And in the end, I walked into his office in his chair with my head held high. Sometimes, winning isn't about revenge. It's about letting the truth, competence, and patience do the work for you. And that's exactly what I did. All right, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the story. We have so many more amazing stories coming your way, so make sure you hit that subscribe button. Our goal is to reach 100K subscribers by the end of this year, and we love for you to be part of this journey. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.